Well, it's always evolved, and of course, in the middle of all this, we got COVID, which meant we just did a few things online for a couple of years. But essentially, we're trying to promote Russell generally, but also specifically for the benefit of Lurgan and the area that he came from, where we think he could be a role model. And so we break the festival down into its elements. There's a sort of, if you like, the educational thing where we can arrange a number of expert talks. There's such a wide range of activities involved. You know, we can get an expert from the cooperative movement, an art historian, a poetry expert, or whatever, and or some other historian, and deliver expert talks. We've put on exhibitions. We ourselves have been very fortunate. We got some high resolution images of a lot of Russell's paintings from different that are held in museums in different places. There are big collections in Ireland. One in Armagh Museum, County Museum. One in Trinity. Another in Lissadell House, County Sligo. So we have got permission and got a lot of those images, and we made up canvases, and we got them framed with nice oldish frames, and we have like a semi-permanent exhibition of an awful lot of Russell's paintings. So we can put on a painting exhibition. They're not the originals, but they look every bit as good, and they're almost indistinguishable from the originals, except they're probably in slightly better condition because they're new canvas. So we can put on a substantial exhibition, and we have a lot of interpretation boards and a lot of stuff gathered. In fact, we were able to put on 2 exhibitions simultaneously, one in Lurgan Library, and we had a very successful exhibition, which we've done twice, in Rushmere Shopping Centre. If you know it, it's a big shopping centre, biggest one in this area by a mile, and it's probably the biggest in Northern Ireland outside Belfast. And we were able to just set up, we had our own exhibition walls, mobile walls, and we set up substantial exhibition and had thousands and thousands of people through it, and collected some great feedback and so on. So we, as regards to the festival, we always put on an exhibition, and we try to keep it fresh and add new things to it, and so on. I mean, there are just, I mean, I didn't even mention some of these things that, you know, like Mahatma Gandhi was an admirer of and wanted to meet him. John F. Kennedy, when he came to speak to the Irish Parliament in the 60s, the last line of his speech refers to what George Russell said. You know, he was an advisor to the US government. He was a pal of like a really close friend of the Vice President of the United States in Roosevelt's 3rd term. And this guy was nobbled, Henry Wallace, you call him, he was nobbled for the nomination. He would have been expected to continue into Roosevelt's 4th term as his vice president, except everyone knew Roosevelt was going to die in his 4th term. He wouldn't get past the end of it. And at the last minute, the party chose Truman as his vice president. And had it been Henry Wallace, who it should have been, but for a bit of political chicanery, there mightn't have been a nuclear bomb. So, because Wallace was a believer in theosophy, like Russell. I'm sure we're getting off topic a wee bit, but anyway, it shows the sort of things we can add into the exhibition. There's just no end to them. So we have a few expert talks. We have an exhibition. And we have a tour, the local tour here in Lurgan, of all the places associated. So they can make a very interesting walkabout. We finish the festival most years on A's birthday. We run it about in April, generally speaking. A's birthday was the 10th of April, and for a bit of a laugh, we have a birthday cake, and we get his nearest known relative in Ireland, this side of the pond, to come down and cut the cake. And we've built up a friendship with Russell's closest descendants, who are largely in County Meath, his closest descendants in Ireland. So they come along and do that. We have an open mic night every year, and that's well attended, and people can come along and do anything, but we sort of factor in a little bit of a George Russell theme into it, you know, maybe read a few of his poems or that sort of thing. Stepping out of that, there are people currently putting some of his poems on, getting different readers to read his poems and putting them against a musical background. and we're going to produce a CD soon of that. Last year we extended the festival into Armagh, and of course there was the Armagh exhibition of his original artwork as well. We contributed to that as well, and that took place in Armagh County Museum. And then we did some fairly unique things. Last year we had a bunch of Americans came over, and I mean there were no grants or anything. These people came over under their own steam to come to the George Russell Festival, and they came over to Armagh. And among their numbers were some people from the indigenous American people, the Dakota tribe, and of course Russell had an affinity with the American indigenous people as well, because he regarded them just the way he regarded Irish farmers, almost, that it was kind of their land and so on, and it had been largely taken from them and ought to be returned to them, and that type of thing. So we had some really interesting musical collaborations, and then we tied up with flash fiction. So we did that in Armagh again with a George Russell theme to all the stories. So those are some of the elements. So it's got bigger and bigger every year. We have some other walks. We have a kind of mystical walk around the shore of Lough Neagh and Lurgan Park. Russell's earliest visions were experienced in Lurgan Park, and we have a guy among our number who gives a talk. We also have spawned, and this is quite a remarkable occurrence, and it kind of shows us that whatever about our efforts, Russell is living on. When we were exhibiting in Rushmere, no less than 4 different people, unsolicited, independently, came and gave us a painting that they had done, that they said was inspired by the exhibition. One girl in particular, she gave us this fabulous picture of Russell that she'd done herself, and she'd included a little bit of his poetry in around it. And she said she'd never heard of him, but when she saw his painting, she was inspired and had to go and do this. And thank you for the inspiration. And we had 3 other cases similar. And we didn't ask anybody to do anything. But what spawned out of that is a couple of those artists have got together with others and formed a little group called Aeon Arts. You might have come across Ursula and Arlene, and they've formed a little offspring of our AE Society, where they are giving art classes and teaching people how to paint like A. Russell, and they're all enjoying trying out different kinds of mystical paintings and experimental and all of that. And we've tied in with others around the mysticism and so on. And there's just no end to it. Like last month, Russell used to go and paint in the summer. He'd work his socks off all year on the cooperative movement and his writings and everything else. But in the summer, he'd allow himself a bit of time to go up to Marble Hill, County Donegal, and he would paint there. And he was an honoured guest of some of the important people in the area and so on. And the local big guy in Marble Hill was a fellow called Hugh Law, who was the local MP and a big barrister and so on. And Russell didn't want to untidy their nice house, so he wanted to go somewhere to paint where he could, he smoked a pipe where he could throw his matches on the floor and have his paint dripping everywhere. And they gave him what had been the little ferry house of their children when they were young, that they built in the woods at the back of Marble Hill House. And we've rediscovered that. It's pretty derelict now, but we've rediscovered that with the current owners. And last month, we brought a group of 20-something people up from all over the place, including a couple of Americans, up who wanted to see the ferry house. They wanted to see the place where Russell had painted for 30 years and to see where he had stayed around the area and so on. And that's again is where Pamela Travers went and sat in the ferry house and so on after Russell's death in 1935. So there's little bits of history. We also had library visits. There are specialist libraries that hold a lot of Russell's material. So we're sort of expanding the amount of activities and the range of talks. I mean, you could do a full talk just on AE and Joyce, never mind Yeats, or A and theatre, or A and just so many things. And I don't think we've even uncovered them all yet, because we keep stepping in and finding he was there as well. Like Lurgan has a Carnegie Library. It's on Carnegie Street, and that was Andrew Carnegie, the generous American philanthropist who supplied these libraries. He was on the committee that decided where they went. That's probably how Lurgan got one. You know, he was Yeats chaired the committee on Irish coinage in the new state, and he consulted Russell. And again, if you're familiar with the old Irish money before it went to the euro, it had on the coins a pig, cow, a hen. Only Russell would have said these are the important elements of Irish life. You know, the agricultural, and she was involved in that as well. So if you think of setting up the architecture of the new Irish state, and he often wrote in his, I mean, he wrote of, he could write, apart from the poetry, he could write politically and economically, as well as mystically. And if you look at some of his, probably his most influential political stroke economics book was called The National Being. And it really was posing the question, well, if you did get a measure of independence, what would you do with it? You know, you wouldn't just be replacing some people in jobs who are English with some people who are now Irish. You would want to do something different, surely. Surely you have some ideas. And he set out a big agenda in the book, The National Being, some of which is, you can see the shape of it even in the institutional structures in Dublin today. You know, the form of the Irish Senate largely comes from his recommendation. So there is so much to put into the festival, but what we're going to try and do is widen it out. We'll always do the festival in Lurgan with the elements that I mentioned, because Lurgan kind of has some ownership there of the man, but so too does Dublin, and so too does the world. So while we might just settle ourselves to do Lurgan in 2024, in 2025, we're going to call that A90. It's the 90th anniversary of his death, and we want Dublin to get on board, and we've already been in touch, you know, with the National Library, National Gallery, Hullane Gallery, cooperative movement, and elements of the Irish government to say, you know, we need to do something substantial here. But of course, we've built up a lot of friendships and relations with other people in the kind of in that sphere. For example, while he was up in Donegal, if he wasn't staying with the Law family, there was a couple of years when he stayed with a guy called Kingsley Porter, the American owner of Glenveigh Castle, which is now a national park. But we've been to Glenveigh, where they have some of his paintings, and where they're really attached to Russell. And we've been invited to put on the exhibition in Glenveigh Castle in Donegal. We're friendly with the Patrick Kavanagh Centre in Monaghan. Patrick Kavanagh was a huge admirer of A. In fact, A liberated him because it was he planted the thought in his head that you can write about the mundane. People say this, they jump to Heaney, but in truth, the first person to really write about the ordinariness of agricultural life in rural Ireland, just an ordinary small farmer, was Kavanagh, under the inspiration of Russell. I think Heaney came along and wrote more about it under the inspiration of Kavanagh, but Kavanagh got it from Russell. And Kavanagh famously, and the guys down in the centre there in Monaghan know this, he used to buy, he had very little money, but he used to buy Russell's journal every week, Irish Statesman. And eventually he wanted to meet him. No money, so he walked, and he spent 3 days walking to Dublin to go and meet George Russell. And it was a funny meeting because, and like Kavanagh was sleeping in hay sheds at night, and when he got to Dublin, he asked, "Where's the poet?" At that time, he was a big name, and Kavanagh went out to the house, and A welcomed him in, and but at the time, A's wife was very ill, and he was sort of nursing her, so he didn't entertain Kavanagh as he might have done, given that the man was half starving. He gave him a cup of tea and a chat and loads of books to set them on his way. It's similar experience with Joyce. Joyce went to see him, and 19-year-old James Joyce went to see Russell. Russell worked very long days. Eventually, he comes back about midnight to 17 Rathgar Avenue, and Joyce, a 19-year-old James Joyce, sitting on his doorstep and saying, "I suppose it's too late to talk." And Russell brings him in and says, "Never too late to talk." And they talked at 4 in the morning. During which time Russell said to him, "Your poetry's okay, but it's not great. Your prose is brilliant, and if you collect some of that into a couple of short stories, I'll publish it for you." This is Joyce at 19, and Russell was the first to publish Joyce, and those short stories, when collected together, eventually became Joyce's first book, Dubliners. And later, Joyce was to acknowledge his debt to Russell in Ulysses, where in Ulysses he mentions Russell 20-something times, but he famously writes in capitals AEIOU. So Joyce loved those little expressions. But so that's the richness of this, and we can factor all those elements into the forthcoming festival. So we're going to try and ambitiously get AE90 underway in different locations, sort of spread across the year. We'll still do our little April festival in Lurgan/Armagh, but we want to spread the AE90 festival to a series of events all over the place, and that's why we've been in touch with we think, reasonable notice, a lot of the national arts and literary movement or organizations, institutions. We've come along and found all sorts of admirers of AE are sort of coming out of the woodwork, people that we didn't realize were fans or even had heard of them. Emer O'Connor is an art historian, and she's written about Irish art and the diaspora in America and so on. And she's the late Sinead O'Connor's sister. Would you have a massive fan of George Russell? And we're finding professors here and there. That's how we hooked up with the American people. There's a bunch of sort of Americans in Minnesota with Irish connections that have got really, really interested in Russell. And they've actually put on a course in the literature of George Russell in Minneapolis. So, and we have a professor from Kyoto University in Japan who's interested in Russell, and various others mainly in Dublin. So we've a lot going on and a lot of strings to pull together. So our strategy is local festival. Following year, we'll try and do a nationwide series of events, but get official Ireland involved, because we're a small group. We're not capable of doing all of that on our own. That's the ambition. But everywhere we go, we find that the doors are opening. We find that once people get in, read into it a wee bit for themselves, they begin to share our fascination, and then it's easy to get them on board for things. We've also produced a couple of small books, which were handy in two ways of spreading the information about Russell, but also, when we were the Rushmere Shopping Centre, when we were there with thousands of people with footfall, they very kindly allowed us to sell the books. So it was a good source of modest income for the group as well, for our activities, and for spreading the word. Let me see. We've this little bit. I don't know if you can see this. That wee book is mainly about Russell and all the local links.
Right.
And then we have just recently produced that, which is like a selection of his poems. People asked for it when they were looking at the other book in the exhibitions, and they asked, was there anywhere was a handy little collection of his poems? So we put that together. We're working on other publications as well that are related. So we have a lot going on, and a lot of ambition for this, but a lot of energy. we find that that expanded festival in Armagh, we've picked up some new members who really are enthusiastic and want to move things forward. And so we have long-term plans as well. We want to eventually create a George Russell Centre, a cultural centre, preferably in Lurgan. And in some of the work, we got a grant to do a feasibility study of that. So we've that done. And I think there's a whole process. I think we next need to move on to kind of like a business case and pick a particular site and all of that. But in the course of that research, we discovered that Lurgan is unique in being the only town of its size, the only population centre of its size, or anywhere near its size, that doesn't have a purpose-built cultural centre. In other words, Lurgan doesn't have a gallery, a museum, a theatre, or any of those things. You know the way Armagh has the marketplace, or Belfast obviously got lots of things, but Lurgan, which I think is about the 7th biggest population centre in Northern Ireland, doesn't have anything. And much smaller towns have purpose-built art centres and cultural centres. So we think, quite apart from our interest in doing it from the George Russell perspective, we think Lurgan is overdue this kind of an installation. So so we're working away on that. We've built up a thorough coalition of interest in that, but we have to, we're taking advice, and we have to get all our ducks in a row and get the project built to a high level of credibility before we go after the big funds, which is what we'd have to go after to make it happen. So that's roughly what we're at. We're with others, because a lot of the people who've joined us aren't from Lurgan, aren't from the local area, and we think that our overall project would get legs if there was also a national George Russell, or a national / international George Russell Appreciation Society, with its roots probably in Dublin, or maybe some roots in Belfast even, that could make the case to big funders that there's something of a revival or a resurgence of interest in Russell, and it's reflected in that there's more than just a little bunch of enthusiasts in Lurgan.